The dining hall at Fort Richardson buzzed with the usual morning energy as soldiers lined up for breakfast. Steam rose from the serving trays, carrying the familiar scent of scrambled eggs, bacon, and fresh coffee. Behind the serving counter, Maria Santos moved with practiced efficiency, her movements precise and economical as she ladled portions onto each tray that passed before her. At 28, Maria had learned to blend into the background. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her uniform was spotless, pressed to perfection. But if anyone had looked closely at her chest, they might have noticed something unusual for someone working in food service: a small silver star pinned among her ribbons. Maria had been assigned to kitchen duty 3 weeks ago, much to her quiet frustration. After serving 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic, she found herself relegated to serving meals instead of saving lives. The assignment felt like a punishment, though she couldn't understand what she had done wrong. The soldiers who came through her line barely looked at her. To them, she was just another face behind the counter, someone to thank politely before moving on to find a table. They saw the uniform but not the person wearing it. They certainly didn't see the silver star that represented one of the most harrowing nights of her military career. Maria had grown up in a small town in Texas, the daughter of Mexican immigrants who had worked multiple jobs to give their children better opportunities. Her father had cleaned office buildings at night while her mother worked as a seamstress during the day. They had taught her the value of hard work and service to others, values that eventually led her to enlist in the Army right after high school. Military life had been challenging from the start. As a young Latina woman in a male-dominated environment, Maria had to prove herself constantly. She worked twice as hard as everyone else, studied longer, trained harder, and never complained. Her dedication paid off when she was accepted into the combat medic program, a role that would take her to the front lines of one of America's longest wars. Afghanistan had changed her in ways she was still discovering. The heat, the dust, the constant threat of improvised explosive devices, and the weight of responsibility for her fellow soldiers' lives had forged her into someone stronger than she ever imagined she could be. She had seen things that would haunt her dreams, but she had also experienced moments of profound purpose when her skills meant the difference between life and death. The silver star on her uniform represented one such moment, a night when everything went wrong, but she had managed to keep her unit alive through sheer determination and medical skill. The medal was supposed to represent honor and valor, but wearing it while serving lunch felt like a cruel joke. Each morning, Maria arrived at the kitchen before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the hundreds of soldiers stationed at Fort Richardson. She worked alongside civilian contractors and other military personnel who had been assigned to food service for various reasons. Some were new recruits learning the basics of military life, others were soldiers recovering from injuries, and a few, like herself, seemed to be there for reasons that weren't entirely clear. The work wasn't glamorous, but Maria approached it with the same dedication she had brought to everything else in her military career. She learned the proper food safety procedures, memorized dietary requirements for soldiers with medical conditions, and made sure every meal met the high standards expected in a military dining facility. Her supervisor, Sergeant First Class Johnson, was a career soldier nearing retirement who seemed content to let the dining hall run itself as long as no one complained. He barely acknowledged Maria's presence beyond giving her daily assignments and checking that she showed up on time. To him, she was just another soldier doing her job. The other kitchen workers were friendly enough, but Maria kept to herself mostly. She wasn't unfriendly, but years of military service had taught her to be cautious about forming relationships too quickly. Besides, she hoped this assignment would be temporary, that someone would recognize her qualifications and move her back to medical duties where her training could be put to better use. During quiet moments between meal services, Maria would sometimes find herself staring out the kitchen windows at the training fields beyond. She could see new recruits learning basic combat skills, medical personnel practicing emergency procedures, and officers planning missions. It was where she wanted to be, where she felt she belonged, but instead she was here measuring portions and wiping down serving counters. The silver star felt heavier some days than others. When she had received it, the ceremony had been formal and dignified. A general had read the citation describing her actions that night in Kandahar province, when her convoy had been ambushed and she had spent 6 hours treating wounded soldiers under enemy fire. She had saved 4 lives that night, working by flashlight in a bombed-out building while Taliban fighters tried to overrun their position. Now, months later, that same medal seemed invisible to everyone around her. Officers walked through the dining hall without a second glance. Fellow enlisted personnel saw her uniform but not her achievements. The disconnect between who she had been in combat and who she appeared to be now was almost overwhelming. Maria's family back home didn't fully understand her frustration. They were proud of her service and her decoration, but they couldn't grasp why serving food felt like such a step backward. Her mother, in particular, thought any job in the military was an honor and couldn't understand why Maria seemed unhappy. Letters from home often asked when she would be coming back to Texas, when she would settle down, when she would give them grandchildren. The questions felt impossibly distant from her current reality. She was a soldier first, a woman second, and right now she was a soldier without a proper mission. The dining hall operated on strict schedules. Breakfast service began at 0600 hours and ended at 0900. Lunch ran from 11:30 to 1400 hours. Dinner service started at 1700 and closed at 1930. Between meals, there was cleaning, preparation, inventory, and endless paperwork. The routine was mind-numbing for someone who had grown accustomed to life and death decisions. Maria found herself counting days, then weeks, then months since her assignment to food service. Each shift felt longer than the last. She had submitted requests to be transferred back to medical duties, but they seemed to disappear into the vast bureaucracy of military administration. No one could tell her why she was in the kitchen or how long she would stay there. The most difficult part wasn't the work itself, but the sense that her skills were being wasted. She was a trained combat medic with real experience saving lives under the worst possible conditions. She could start in complete darkness, perform emergency surgery in the field, and coordinate medical evacuations under enemy fire. Yet here she was, asking soldiers if they wanted extra rolls with their meal. Some nights, Maria would lie in her bunk staring at the ceiling, replaying that night in Afghanistan when she had earned the Silver Star. The memory was both a source of pride and a reminder of what she was capable of when given the chance to serve properly. She wondered if she would ever get that chance again, or if she was destined to serve out her remaining military obligation in the dining hall. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was serving the same soldiers she might once have treated for injuries. Some of the faces that passed through her line might have been in her aid station if circumstances had been different. They probably needed her medical skills more than they needed her to serve their lunch, but the military had decided otherwise. As another day in the kitchen came to an end, Maria cleaned her station methodically and prepared for the next morning's service. Tomorrow would bring the same routine, the same faces, the same sense that she was marking time rather than making a difference. She adjusted her Silver Star one final time before leaving the dining hall, hoping that somehow, someone would eventually notice what it represented and remember that she was capable of much more than serving food. The base settled into evening quiet as Maria walked back to her quarters, past the medical facilities where she longed to work, past the training areas where soldiers prepared for deployment, past the administrative buildings where decisions about her future were being made without her input. Tomorrow would be another day in the kitchen, another day of waiting for someone to recognize that a decorated combat veteran was being wasted on lunch duty. But tomorrow would also bring new possibilities, new faces, and perhaps new opportunities for someone to see past the server's uniform to the soldier underneath. Maria didn't know it yet, but her patience was about to be rewarded in a way she could never have anticipated. The Silver Star that had seemed so invisible to everyone around her was about to catch the attention of someone who understood exactly what it meant and what kind of soldier wore it with such quiet dignity. Tuesday morning started like any other day for Maria Santos. The alarm buzzed at 0445 hours, and she rolled out of her narrow bunk in the enlisted quarters. The barracks were quiet except for the occasional snore from down the hallway and the distant sound of early morning PT formations beginning their runs around the base perimeter. Maria dressed quickly in the dim light, careful not to wake her roommate who had the luxury of sleeping in another hour. She pinned her ribbons and medals to her uniform with the same precision she had learned in basic training, each decoration placed exactly where regulations specified. The silver star caught a glint of light from the hallway as she fastened it in place. The walk to the dining hall took her past the base headquarters building, where lights were already burning in several windows. Fort Richardson was home to multiple units, and the administrative staff seemed to work around the clock coordinating training exercises, deployment schedules, and the endless paperwork that kept a military base functioning. In the kitchen, Maria began her usual routine. She helped the night shift finish the last of the breakfast preparation, checked that all serving stations were properly stocked, and reviewed the day's menu. Tuesday was always busy because it was the day when visiting officials often toured the base, which meant extra attention to presentation and the possibility of serving people she had never seen before. Sergeant First Class Johnson arrived at his usual time, coffee in hand and looking like he would rather be anywhere else. He was a decent supervisor but clearly counting the days until retirement. His main concern was avoiding problems that might reflect badly on his record, which meant everything had to run smoothly and quietly. "Santos, you're on the main serving line today," Johnson announced as he reviewed the duty roster. "We might have some VIPs coming through for lunch. Make sure your uniform is squared away and keep the portions consistent." Maria nodded and took her position behind the serving counter. VIP visits were common enough that they had become routine. Usually, it meant a group of officers would walk through quickly, sampling small portions while discussing logistics or budgets. The visitors rarely interacted with the serving staff beyond basic pleasantries. The morning breakfast service proceeded without incident. Soldiers filed through in their usual pattern, grabbing quick meals before heading to their assigned duties. Maria recognized many of the faces by now: the young private who always asked for extra hash browns, the sergeant who preferred his eggs over easy, the lieutenant who was clearly not a morning person and barely grunted his thanks. Between breakfast and lunch, Maria helped prepare for the day's main meal. The menu included grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, rice pilaf, and fresh salad, a step up from the usual fare because of the expected visitors. The kitchen staff worked with extra care, knowing that their work might be evaluated by people with the authority to make their lives difficult if standards weren't met. As lunch service approached, word spread through the kitchen that the visiting group would be larger than usual. Instead of the typical small delegation of officers, they were expecting a full inspection tour that might include personnel from the Pentagon. The news made everyone a little more nervous, and Johnson walked through the kitchen checking every detail twice. Maria took her position at the main serving line, where she would be responsible for the grilled chicken, one of the more popular items and therefore one that would be noticed if portions were inconsistent or presentation was sloppy. She arranged the serving utensils carefully and made sure her section of the counter was spotless. The first wave of lunch visitors was the usual crowd of soldiers and staff. Maria served mechanically, her attention partly focused on watching for the arrival of the VIP group. She had learned to spot visiting officials by their bearing and the way they moved through the dining hall, more purposeful than regular diners, often accompanied by base personnel who were clearly trying to impress them. At approximately 1,230 hours, Maria noticed a change in the atmosphere of the dining hall. Conversations became more subdued, and several senior officers appeared near the entrance, clearly waiting for someone important. She straightened her posture and focused on her serving, wanting to make sure she did nothing that might embarrass herself or her unit. The VIP group entered with little fanfare but unmistakable authority. Maria could see them from the corner of her eye as they moved through the dining hall, pausing occasionally to speak with diners or observe operations. The group included several officers she didn't recognize, along with some base personnel she had seen around Fort Richardson. Leading the group was a man in his 50s wearing the stars of a general officer. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to command, but his demeanor seemed more approachable than some senior officers Maria had encountered. He spoke quietly with his companions as they toured the facility, occasionally asking questions or making observations. As the group approached the serving line, Maria focused intently on her duties. She could hear fragments of conversation about food quality, cost efficiency, and soldier satisfaction with dining services. The discussion was professional but not overly critical, the kind of evaluation that suggested genuine interest in how things operated rather than a search for problems. The general stepped up to Maria's station and smiled politely as she prepared to serve him. "The chicken looks excellent," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his rank but without the harsh edge that some officers seem to cultivate. "Thank you, sir," Maria replied, using her serving utensils to select a well-presented piece of grilled chicken for his plate. Her movements were smooth and professional, the result of weeks of repetitive practice. As she placed the chicken on his plate, the general's eyes moved briefly to her uniform, scanning the ribbons and decorations as officers often did when meeting someone new. Maria was accustomed to this quick evaluation. It was how military personnel quickly assessed each other's experience and qualifications. But something unusual happened. Instead of moving on to the next station, the general paused, his attention caught by something specific. His eyes focused on the silver star among Maria's ribbons, and his expression changed slightly. The polite smile remained, but there was now genuine interest and something that looked like recognition. "Excuse me, soldier," the general said, his voice taking on a different tone. "Is that a silver star?" Maria felt her heart rate increase slightly. "Yes, sir," she replied, maintaining her professional demeanor despite her surprise at the question. The general studied the medal more carefully, and Maria could see him reading the ribbon configuration that told the story of her service. His expression grew more serious as he recognized other decorations, the Combat Medical Badge, the Afghanistan Campaign Medal, and the various ribbons that indicated multiple deployments and commendations. "Would you mind telling me where you earned that?" he asked, his question clearly indicating that this was no longer a routine inspection stop. Maria glanced quickly at her supervisor, who was watching the interaction with obvious concern about what might be happening. Johnson stepped closer, probably wondering if one of his staff members was about to be criticized for something. "Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, sir," Maria answered. "I was a combat medic with the 173rd Airborne Brigade." The general nodded slowly, and Maria could see recognition in his eyes. As a senior officer, he would be familiar with significant military actions and decorations. The Silver Star wasn't awarded lightly, and he clearly understood what it represented. "The 173rd, he repeated thoughtfully. "That was some tough fighting in Kandahar." "When did this happen?" "October 2022, sir," Maria replied. She could feel the attention of everyone nearby, including other soldiers in line who were curious about why a general was having an extended conversation with someone serving lunch. The general was quiet for a moment, apparently processing this information. Maria wondered if he might be familiar with the specific action that had earned her the decoration, or if he was simply trying to understand how a Silver Star recipient had ended up serving food. "And you're assigned to dining services now?" he asked, his tone suggesting that this struck him as unusual. "Yes, sir," Maria confirmed, though she was careful to keep any hint of complaint out of her voice. Military protocol demanded that she not criticize her assignment, especially to a general officer. The general looked at her thoughtfully, then glanced around the dining hall as if seeing it with new eyes. Maria could almost see him thinking, trying to understand how someone with her qualifications and decorations had ended up in this position. "What's your name, soldier?" he asked. "Specialist Santos, sir." "Maria Santos." "Well, Specialist Santos, thank you for your service," he said formally, but with obvious sincerity. "Both in Afghanistan and here." He moved on to the next station, but Maria noticed that he looked back at her several times during the remainder of his tour. The brief interaction had clearly made an impression on him, though Maria couldn't predict what, if anything, might come of it. As the VIP group continued through the dining hall, Maria tried to return her focus to serving the remaining lunch crowd. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. For the first time since being assigned to food service, someone had noticed her silver star and understood what it meant. The rest of lunch service passed in a blur. Maria served mechanically, her mind replaying the conversation with the general. She wondered who he was, what unit he commanded, and whether their brief interaction might somehow lead to a change in her situation. After the dining hall emptied and the cleaning began, Sergeant Johnson approached her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Santos, what was that about with the general?" he asked. "He noticed my silver star, Sergeant. Asked where I earned it." Johnson looked at her with what might have been newfound respect. "That was General Morrison," he said. "He's the commanding general of the entire installation." Maria felt a flutter of surprise. She had been serving lunch to the person responsible for everything that happened at Fort Richardson. The commanding general had noticed her silver star and taken the time to ask about it. "Did I do something wrong, Sergeant?" she asked. "No," Johnson replied slowly. "I don't think you did anything wrong at all. In fact, I think you might have done something very right." As Maria finished her cleanup duties and prepared for the afternoon break, she couldn't help but wonder if her chance encounter with General Morrison might somehow change her situation. For weeks, she had felt invisible, forgotten, wasted in an assignment that didn't match her skills or experience. Now, for the first time since arriving at Fort Richardson, someone in authority had seen past her current duties to recognize what she was capable of. Whether that recognition would lead to any concrete changes remained to be seen, but Maria felt a spark of hope that had been missing for far too long. The silver star that had seemed so meaningless while serving lunch had suddenly become her connection to a different future. She didn't know what would happen next, but she had the distinct feeling that her quiet days in the dining hall might be coming to an end. General Morrison couldn't shake the image of the young specialist serving lunch with a silver star on her uniform. As he concluded his tour of the dining facilities and moved on to other scheduled inspections, the incongruity of what he had witnessed continued to trouble him. In his 30 years of military service, he had learned to trust his instincts when something didn't seem right. Back in his office at base headquarters, Morrison asked his aide, Major Patricia Williams, to join him for a brief discussion. Williams was an efficient officer who had been with him for 2 years and understood his preference for getting to the bottom of unusual situations quickly and quietly. "Patricia, during today's dining hall inspection, I encountered something unusual," Morrison began, settling behind his desk. "There's a specialist assigned to food service who's wearing a silver star. Combat medic, served with the 173rd Airborne in Afghanistan." Major Williams raised an eyebrow. The Silver Star was the nation's third highest decoration for valor, rarely awarded to junior enlisted personnel unless they had demonstrated extraordinary courage under fire. Finding such a decorated soldier serving lunch was indeed unusual. "That does seem odd, sir. Do you want me to look into her assignment history?" Williams asked, already reaching for her notebook. "Please do. Her name is Maria Santos. I'd like to understand how she ended up in dining services and whether there's a good reason for it," Morrison replied. "And, Patricia, let's keep this discreet. I don't want to create problems for anyone unnecessarily." As Major Williams left to begin her inquiries, Morrison found himself thinking about the brief conversation he had had with Specialist Santos. She had answered his questions professionally and without complaint, but he had sensed something beneath the surface, not dissatisfaction exactly, but perhaps resignation. It was the look of someone who was doing her duty but felt underutilized. The general had seen that expression before, usually on the faces of talented soldiers who had somehow fallen through the cracks of military bureaucracy. Sometimes it was the result of personality conflicts with supervisors, sometimes administrative errors, and occasionally punishment for infractions that weren't serious enough for formal discipline but resulted in less desirable assignments. Morrison's experience had taught him that the military, despite its emphasis on efficiency and merit, sometimes failed to properly utilize its human resources. Good soldiers could find themselves in the wrong jobs for reasons that had nothing to do with their capabilities or potential. When this happened with decorated veterans, it represented not just a waste of talent but a failure of leadership. While Williams conducted her research, Morrison continued with his scheduled activities. He reviewed training reports, met with unit commanders, and attended a briefing on upcoming exercises. But, throughout the afternoon, he found himself thinking about Specialist Santos and wondering what her story might reveal about how his installation was managing its personnel. Major Williams was thorough in her investigation, accessing personnel records, training files, and assignment histories through the military's extensive database systems. What she discovered painted a puzzling picture that would require careful interpretation. Maria Santos had enlisted in the Army immediately after high school graduation with strong academic credentials and high scores on military aptitude tests. She had excelled in basic training and advanced individual training for combat medics, graduating near the top of her class. Her early performance evaluations were consistently excellent, noting her dedication, technical proficiency, and leadership potential. Her deployment records showed 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 173rd Airborne Brigade, where she had served as a combat medic in some of the most dangerous areas of operation. The citation for her Silver Star told a remarkable story of courage and skill under extreme circumstances. On October 15, 2022, Specialist Santos's convoy had been ambushed by Taliban fighters in a remote valley in Kandahar province. The attack had disabled 2 vehicles and wounded 6 soldiers, including the unit's senior medic. Under heavy enemy fire and with limited supplies, Santos had spent over 6 hours treating the wounded while coordinating their evacuation. Working by flashlight in a partially collapsed building, she had performed emergency surgery on a soldier with severe abdominal wounds, stabilized another with traumatic brain injury, and kept 4 other wounded soldiers alive until reinforcements could reach their position. Her actions that night had saved the lives of 4 soldiers and prevented permanent disability for 2 others. The citation noted her exceptional courage, technical competence, and selfless dedication to her fellow soldiers under the most hazardous conditions. Such language was not used lightly in military decorations. The Silver Star represented recognition of heroism that went well beyond normal expectations of duty. Following her return from Afghanistan, Santos had been stationed at Fort Bragg, where she continued serving as a combat medic. Her performance evaluations remained excellent, and she had been promoted to specialist ahead of her peers. There was no indication of disciplinary problems, attitude issues, or performance deficiencies. The puzzling part came with her transfer to Fort Richardson. The paperwork showed that she had been reassigned due to administrative requirements, a catch-all phrase that could mean almost anything. There was no explanation of why a decorated combat medic would be needed for administrative purposes at a base that had its own medical facilities. Even more curious was her assignment to dining services upon arrival at Fort Richardson. The orders simply stated that she was to report to the food service section for duty assignment, with no indication of how long this assignment was expected to last or what purpose it served. Major Williams dug deeper, checking with the personnel office at Fort Richardson to see if there might be additional documentation that explained Santos's unusual career path. What she found was a series of administrative shuffles that seemed to lack clear purpose or direction. The personnel clerk she spoke with, Sergeant Martinez, remembered Santos's arrival because it was unusual to receive a combat medic for assignment to dining services. Martinez had asked his supervisor about it at the time but was told to process the assignment as written and not ask questions. "It seemed weird to me," Martinez told Williams over the phone. "I mean, we got plenty of medical facilities on base that could use experienced medics. But the orders were clear, so that's where I sent her." Williams also discovered that Santos had submitted multiple requests for transfer back to medical duties since arriving at Fort Richardson. Each request had been routed through proper channels but seemed to disappear without formal response. The requests were properly formatted, professional in tone, and included documentation of her medical qualifications and experience. The most recent request, submitted just 2 weeks earlier, had included letters of recommendation from her former commanders at Fort Bragg, all of whom praised her abilities and recommended her for increased responsibility in medical roles. None of the requests had received even an acknowledgement, much less a substantive response. As Williams compiled her findings, a picture emerged of a highly qualified soldier who had somehow become lost in the military bureaucracy. Whether through administrative error, oversight, or some other factor, Santos appeared to have been assigned to duties that made no use of her training, experience, or demonstrated capabilities. When Williams presented her findings to General Morrison the next morning, his reaction was immediate and pointed. "So we have a Silver Star recipient, a decorated combat medic with excellent performance reviews, serving lunch because of administrative requirements that nobody can explain?" Morrison summarized after reviewing the file. "That's essentially correct, sir. And she's been trying to get reassigned to medical duties for months without receiving any response to her requests," Williams added. Morrison was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. As the commanding general, he was ultimately responsible for ensuring that his personnel were properly utilized and that good soldiers weren't wasted in inappropriate assignments. The situation with Santos represented exactly the kind of leadership failure he worked hard to prevent. "Patricia, I want you to set up a meeting with Specialist Santos. Not a formal interview, just a conversation. I want to hear her side of this story before we decide how to proceed," Morrison instructed. "Should I involve her chain of command in the meeting?" Williams asked. "Not initially. Let's talk to her directly first. If there are issues with her supervisors, I want to understand them before we bring others into the discussion." Williams nodded and made notes in her file. "When would you like to meet with her, sir?" "As soon as possible. This afternoon if she's available after the lunch service. And, Patricia, make it clear that she's not in trouble. I don't want her spending the day worrying about why the commanding general wants to see her." As Williams left to arrange the meeting, Morrison found himself both frustrated and hopeful. Frustrated that a decorated soldier had apparently been overlooked and misassigned for months, but hopeful that the situation could be corrected before permanent damage was done to Santos's career or morale. The general had learned throughout his career that the military's greatest strength was its people, but only when those people were properly led, trained, and utilized. When good soldiers were wasted in inappropriate assignments, it hurt not just the individual but the entire organization. Morrison spent the rest of the morning reviewing other personnel files, wondering if Santos's situation was unique or if there might be other soldiers at Fort Richardson who were similarly underutilized. The possibility that systematic problems might exist in how his installation managed assignments was troubling and would require careful investigation. But first, he wanted to hear directly from Specialist Santos about her experience and her perspective on how she had ended up serving lunch instead of saving lives. Her story might reveal not just individual oversights but institutional problems that needed to be addressed at a higher level. The silver star on her uniform had caught his attention, but it was the soldier wearing it who now had his full concern. Morrison was determined to understand how someone with her qualifications and record had slipped through the cracks, and, more importantly, how to ensure it didn't happen to others. As lunch service began in the dining hall below, Morrison looked out his office window and thought about the decorated combat medic who was once again serving food instead of utilizing the skills that had saved lives in Afghanistan. By the end of the day, he intended to have a much clearer picture of how this situation had developed and what could be done to fix it. The investigation into Maria Santos's assignment was about to reveal problems that went beyond one soldier's career, but it would also provide an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of leadership that recognized talent and corrected injustices when they were discovered. Maria Santos received the message from Major Williams just after lunch service ended. The aide's tone was reassuring but formal. General Morrison wanted to meet with her that afternoon to discuss her assignment and career progression. She was assured that she wasn't in trouble and that the meeting was simply an opportunity for the commanding general to better understand her background and qualifications. Despite the reassurances, Maria felt a mixture of nervousness and hope as she cleaned her station and prepared for the afternoon break. In her 5 years of military service, she had never been summoned for a personal meeting with anyone above the rank of colonel. The fact that the commanding general of the entire installation wanted to speak with her was both intimidating and potentially life-changing. Maria used her break time to return to her quarters and ensure her uniform was perfect for the meeting. She cleaned and pressed everything meticulously, polished her boots until they gleamed, and carefully arranged her ribbons and medals. The silver star that had started this entire sequence of events was positioned precisely according to regulations. At 1500 hours, Maria reported to the headquarters building and was escorted to General Morrison's office by Major Williams. The aide was professional but friendly, engaging in small talk that helped calm Maria's nerves as they walked through corridors lined with portraits of distinguished officers and displays of unit awards. General Morrison's office was impressive but not ostentatious. Military awards and commendations covered one wall, while another displayed photographs from various assignments and deployments. A large desk dominated the center of the room, with comfortable chairs arranged for informal meetings. The overall impression was of serious purpose tempered with approachability. Morrison stood as Maria entered and gestured for her to take a seat in one of the comfortable chairs rather than standing at attention for a formal interview. This immediately signaled that the conversation would be more personal than official, though Maria remained alert and respectful. "Specialist Santos, thank you for taking the time to meet with me," Morrison began, settling into the chair across from her. "I hope Major Williams explained that this is just an informal conversation about your assignment and experience here at Fort Richardson." "Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you," Maria replied, maintaining military bearing while trying to relax slightly in response to the general's informal tone. Morrison opened a file folder that Maria assumed contained her personnel records and service history. She wondered what conclusions he might have drawn from reviewing her background and how much he knew about her current assignment situation. "I've been reviewing your record, and I have to say, it's quite impressive," Morrison continued. "Exceptional performance in training, outstanding evaluations throughout your career, and, of course, the Silver Star for your actions in Afghanistan. Can you tell me a little about that night in Kandahar?" Maria had told the story of that October evening many times during the medal ceremony and subsequent interviews, but she had never been asked about it by someone of Morrison's rank. She took a breath and began to recount the events that had changed her life. She described the ambush that had destroyed 2 vehicles and left 6 soldiers wounded, including her senior medic. She explained how she had taken charge of the medical situation while under continuous enemy fire, working by flashlight in a partially collapsed building to treat injuries that ranged from gunshot wounds to traumatic brain injury. Morrison listened intently as Maria described the technical challenges of performing emergency surgery with limited supplies, the difficulty of keeping wounded soldiers stable for hours while waiting for evacuation, and the constant threat of enemy fighters attempting to overrun their position. "The hardest part wasn't the medical procedures," Maria explained. "I had trained for those situations, and the skills were almost automatic. The hardest part was keeping everyone calm and focused while we waited for help. Some of the wounded soldiers were panicking, and I had to keep reassuring them that we would all make it out." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "Your citation mentions that you saved 4 lives that night. In your own assessment, what made the difference?" Maria considered the question carefully. "Preparation and teamwork, sir. I had trained extensively for combat medical situations, so I knew what to do even under extreme stress. But equally important was working with the other soldiers who weren't wounded. They helped me move patients, held flashlights, and watched for enemy activity while I worked. No one accomplishes anything like that alone." The general made notes in the file as she spoke, occasionally asking follow-up questions about specific aspects of her training or her decision-making process that night. Maria could tell that he understood the military context of her actions and appreciated the technical complexity of what she had accomplished. After discussing her combat experience, Morrison shifted the conversation to her current situation. "Now, I'm curious about your assignment here at Fort Richardson. How did you end up in dining services?" This was the question Maria had been both hoping for and dreading. She wanted to answer honestly without sounding like she was complaining or criticizing her superiors, but she also wanted to convey her frustration with being underutilized. "Sir, I was transferred here from Fort Bragg due to what my orders called administrative requirements. When I arrived and reported for duty, I was assigned to dining services. I was told it was temporary, but it's been 3 months now, and I haven't received any information about when I might be reassigned to medical duties." Morrison looked up from his notes. "Have you requested transfer back to medical assignments?" "Yes, sir. I've submitted formal requests monthly since arriving here. I've included documentation of my qualifications, letters of recommendation from my previous commanders, and explanations of how my skills could be better utilized in the medical facilities here on base." "And what response have you received to these requests?" Morrison asked, though Maria suspected he already knew the answer. "No response, sir. The requests seem to disappear into the system without any acknowledgement or explanation," Maria admitted, trying to keep frustration out of her voice. Morrison was quiet for a moment, reviewing his notes and apparently considering how to proceed. Maria wondered if her honesty about the lack of response to her transfer requests might cause problems for her supervisors, but she had decided to answer all questions truthfully. "Specialist Santos, in your opinion, how could your skills and experience be better utilized here at Fort Richardson?" Morrison asked. This was the opening Maria had hoped for, a chance to explain how she could contribute more effectively to the mission if given appropriate assignments. She had thought carefully about this possibility during her months in the dining hall. "Sir, Fort Richardson has extensive medical facilities and training programs that could benefit from my combat experience. I could work in the base hospital, assist with training new medics, or support units preparing for deployment. My Afghanistan experience gives me knowledge of injuries and medical challenges that new medics might face in combat." Morrison nodded as she spoke. "What about leadership roles? Your record shows consistently high performance and recommendations for increased responsibility." Maria felt a surge of hope. Leadership opportunities were exactly what she had been hoping to pursue, and the fact that Morrison was asking about them suggested he might be considering options beyond just transferring her back to basic medical duties. "I would welcome any leadership opportunities, sir. I've been looking for chances to mentor junior medics and help develop training programs based on real combat experience. I think I could make a significant contribution in those areas." The general closed her file and leaned back in his chair, studying her thoughtfully. Maria could see him weighing various factors and considering different possibilities. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. "Specialist Santos, I want you to know that I find your current assignment inappropriate and wasteful," Morrison said finally. "A soldier with your qualifications and experience should be in a position where those capabilities are fully utilized, not serving lunch in a dining hall." Maria felt a wave of relief that someone in authority finally understood her situation and saw the disconnect between her capabilities and her current duties. Morrison continued, "I also want you to know that the lack of response to your transfer requests is unacceptable. When good soldiers submit professional requests through proper channels, they deserve at least the courtesy of acknowledgement and explanation, even if the answer is negative." The general's tone had become more formal, suggesting that he was speaking not just as someone offering career advice but as a commanding officer identifying problems that needed correction. "What I'm going to do is assign Major Williams to conduct a comprehensive review of how you ended up in your current position and why your transfer requests have been ignored. This review will also examine whether there are systemic issues in how we manage personnel assignments that might be affecting other soldiers." Maria nodded, appreciating that Morrison was taking her situation seriously and looking at broader implications rather than just treating it as an isolated problem. In the meantime, Morrison continued, I want to move quickly to get you into a more appropriate assignment. Major Williams will coordinate with the base medical officer to identify positions where your experience and skills can be properly utilized. This should happen within the next week, not months from now. The relief Maria felt was overwhelming, but she managed to maintain her military composure. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate your attention to this matter. Morrison stood, indicating that the meeting was concluding. Specialist Santos, I want to apologize for the fact that this situation went on as long as it did. Good soldiers like yourself deserve better from their leadership, and I intend to make sure that better leadership is what you receive going forward. As Maria prepared to leave, Morrison had one final comment. That silver star on your uniform represents the kind of courage and dedication this army needs in its leaders. I expect great things from your future service, and I'll be personally interested in your career progression. Walking back to her quarters after the meeting, Maria felt lighter than she had in months. For the first time since arriving at Fort Richardson, she had hoped that her situation would change and that her skills would be properly utilized. More importantly, she had been heard by someone who understood her value and was committed to correcting the injustices she had experienced. The silver star that had seemed so meaningless while serving lunch had once again proven its power to open doors and create opportunities. But, more than that, it had connected her with a leader who recognized talent and was willing to take action to ensure that talent was properly developed and utilized. As she prepared for what might be her last evening in the dining hall, Maria felt grateful not just for the coming change in her assignment, but for the reminder that good leadership still existed in the military and was willing to fight for soldiers who had been overlooked or forgotten. Within a week of her meeting with General Morrison, Maria Santos found herself walking through the corridors of Fort Richardson's main medical facility for the first time as an assigned member of the staff. The transition had happened with remarkable speed, a testament to what could be accomplished when senior leadership decided to make something a priority. Major Williams had been true to her word, conducting a thorough review of how Maria had ended up in dining services and coordinating with the base medical officer to identify appropriate assignments. What they discovered was both troubling and enlightening, revealing systemic problems in personnel management that went far beyond one misassigned soldier. The investigation revealed that Maria's transfer to Fort Richardson had been the result of a computer error in the personnel system. She had been coded as needing reassignment due to administrative requirements when she should have been transferred to fill a specific medical position that had remained vacant for months. The error had gone unnoticed because the receiving units, both dining services and the medical facility, had assumed someone else was responsible for the assignment. More disturbing was the discovery that Maria's transfer requests had been routed to an office that had been reorganized months earlier. The requests had been sitting in an electronic inbox that no one monitored, not because of malicious intent but because of bureaucratic confusion about responsibilities after the reorganization. The review also uncovered 3 other soldiers at Fort Richardson who had been similarly misassigned, though none as dramatically as Maria. General Morrison had ordered immediate reviews of all questionable assignments and implemented new procedures to ensure that transfer requests received timely responses, even if the answer was negative. For Maria, the most immediate result was her assignment as a senior medic in the base emergency department, a position that would fully utilize her combat experience and technical skills. Dr. Sarah Chen, the chief of emergency medicine, had personally requested Maria's assignment after reviewing her combat record and Silver Star citation. We've been needing someone with real trauma experience, Dr. Chen had explained during Maria's first day orientation. Most of our staff have excellent training but limited experience with the kind of severe injuries you dealt with in Afghanistan. Your presence will make our entire department more effective. Maria's first week in the emergency department confirmed Dr. Chen's assessment. While Fort Richardson wasn't a combat zone, military training exercises and civilian accidents still produced serious injuries that required immediate and expert treatment. Maria's calm competence under pressure and her extensive knowledge of trauma medicine quickly made her an invaluable team member. More importantly for Maria's long-term career development, Dr. Chen recommended her for the Army's Physician Assistant Program, a competitive educational opportunity that would significantly advance her medical career and leadership potential. The recommendation carried significant weight because it came from a respected medical officer who had observed Maria's capabilities firsthand. "You have the technical skills, the experience, and the leadership qualities we look for in PAs," Dr. Chen had told her. "More importantly, you have the kind of judgment that only comes from making life and death decisions in real situations. The Army needs medical leaders with your background." General Morrison had personally endorsed the recommendation, writing in his evaluation that Maria represented exactly the kind of soldier leader the Army needs to develop for positions of increased responsibility. His support virtually guaranteed acceptance into the program, which would begin the following year. The transformation in Maria's daily life was remarkable. Instead of counting portions and cleaning serving stations, she was back to practicing the medicine she loved. She treated everything from training injuries to serious accidents, worked with helicopter evacuation teams, and began developing training programs for junior medics based on her combat experience. Her colleagues in the medical department quickly recognized her expertise and began seeking her advice on complex cases. Maria found herself naturally falling into mentorship roles with newer medics, sharing not just technical knowledge but the kind of practical wisdom that only came from real experience in high-stress medical situations. The change in Maria's outlook was equally dramatic. The sense of purpose and professional fulfillment she had felt in Afghanistan returned as she once again used her skills to help others in meaningful ways. The frustration and resignation that had characterized her months in dining services were replaced by enthusiasm for her work and optimism about her future in the military. 3 months after her reassignment, Maria received another unexpected opportunity. General Morrison asked her to brief a visiting group of congressional representatives about the realities of military medical care in combat situations. The briefing was part of a larger presentation about military healthcare, and Morrison wanted the representatives to hear directly from someone who had provided medical care under fire. Maria's presentation to the congressional delegation was powerful and well received. She spoke about the challenges of treating severe injuries with limited supplies, the importance of continuous training for combat medics, and the need for advanced medical equipment that could function in harsh environments. Her credibility as a decorated combat veteran lent weight to her recommendations. Following the briefing, Representative Patricia Johnson, who chaired a subcommittee on military personnel, approached Maria for further discussion. "Your insights about combat medicine are exactly what we need to hear when we're making decisions about medical training and equipment," she told Maria. "Would you be willing to testify before our subcommittee about these issues?" Maria agreed, understanding that such testimony could influence policies that would affect future combat medics and the soldiers they treated. The opportunity to have input on military medical policy was both humbling and exciting, representing a level of influence she had never imagined possible when she was serving lunch. The invitation to testify before Congress also reflected how dramatically her profile within the military had changed. General Morrison ensured that news of her reassignment and success in her new role was shared with senior medical officers throughout the Army. Maria's story became an example of how proper personnel management could unlock hidden potential and maximize the return on military training investments. Other installations began requesting Maria for temporary assignments to help develop their combat medical training programs. Her combination of recent combat experience, proven teaching ability, and formal recognition of her courage made her a sought-after instructor for units preparing for deployment. The most significant long-term change, however, was in how Maria viewed her own potential within the military. The experience of being overlooked and underutilized had been frustrating, but the response from leadership once the problem was recognized had restored her faith in the military as an institution that could identify and correct its mistakes. Maria began setting more ambitious career goals, including the possibility of pursuing advanced medical degrees and eventually becoming a medical officer herself. The physician assistant program would be just the first step in a career path that could take her to senior leadership positions within military medicine. Her story also had impact beyond her personal career. General Morrison used Maria's case as an example in leadership training programs, emphasizing the importance of recognizing talent regardless of where it might be found and the necessity of responding quickly when good soldiers identified problems in the system. The dining hall where Maria had spent 3 months serving lunch now seemed like a distant memory, though she occasionally visited during breaks to thank Sergeant Johnson and the kitchen staff who had worked alongside her. Her experience there had taught her valuable lessons about perseverance and maintaining professionalism even in frustrating circumstances. The silver star that had caught General Morrison's attention remained prominently displayed on Maria's uniform, but now it was joined by new ribbons and commendations recognizing her contributions in her medical role. More importantly, it served as a reminder that recognition and opportunity could come when least expected, often from people who understood the true value of military service. As Maria prepared for her transition to the physician assistant program, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that Tuesday lunch service when General Morrison had noticed her medal. The chance encounter had transformed not just her assignment but her entire career trajectory, opening doors to opportunities she could never have imagined. The experience reinforced her belief in the military's core values of service, excellence, and leadership, while also highlighting the importance of leaders who were willing to look beyond surface appearances to recognize the potential in every soldier. Maria's story had become proof that talent could be found anywhere and that good leadership could transform individual lives while strengthening the entire organization. Looking ahead to her future service, Maria felt grateful for the chain of events that had brought her to this point. The Silver Star had opened the door, but it was her own dedication, skills, and professional performance that had carried her through. She was determined to use the opportunity she had been given to serve with distinction and to help other soldiers achieve their own potential. The young woman who had served lunch while wearing a Silver Star had evolved into a recognized leader and medical professional with a bright future ahead of her. Her journey from the dining hall to the emergency department had taken only months, but the lessons learned and opportunities gained would shape the rest of her military career. Most importantly, Maria's story had become an inspiration to other soldiers who might feel overlooked or underutilized, proving that with persistence, professionalism, and a little bit of luck, even the most unlikely circumstances could lead to extraordinary opportunities for growth and service.